Thank you for joining today and always. As you know, the title of this class is Midrash, Stories to Live By. And up to this point, I hope that you've taken away for Midrash and have gleaned from our rabbis on how to live more meaningfully. But on Sukkot, for all of its joy, the joyful holiday, right? You should have only joy. There's also a big component that's reminding us of temporality, and in a sense, our mortality, right? It says Oseh Sukkato make your temporary dwelling permanent and your permanent dwelling. So there's a transience on impermanence and vulnerability, and that is something that the sukkah is also trying to inspire in us. So while the topic is stories to live by, today I wanted to take explore the flip side of that coin. So it's called stories to die by. I want to talk about mortality. Not a fun, happy topic, and I also don't want anybody to feel captive into a discussion that is painful or that they didn't sign up for on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. So I want to give people permission. If it's not a topic you want to discuss, feel free to just enjoy lunch. And if you need to get up and walk out, I won't be offended personally.
No acting out.
No acting out, yes. Let me see if I can quickly get a source sheet up onto the Zoom. And then we'll begin.
Rabbi?
The internet is not the quickest. Okay, here we go. Oops, it's not the one. All right. Okay, good. Here it is. And I'll share screen, and we should be off and running. All right, can you see it on Zoom? Can you see the source sheet? Good. Okay, before we begin, I want to ask a question for the room, which is, when thinking about our inevitable mortality, what is most important to you? What are the things that are most important to you about ending life? What's a hope for you in terms of, what are the things that matter most to you when thinking about end of life? Not being a bird. And I get it. This is a very serious and tough topic. So appreciate everybody's vulnerability.
A smooth, non-painful passing.
A smooth, non-painful passing. But not being a burden to family, smooth, not painful, right? Pain. There's a difference between pain and suffering, right? Pain really describes more your physical comfort, and suffering can be much more internal. You could be suffering without pain, and you could have.
I lost a first cousin to ALS, which is just horrible.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go that way.
Yeah. Terrible.
You're there and you know you're there and nothing works and you just not.
Yeah. So sorry. Or did you point out the bracha? I did memory be a blessing. Yes.
You want to know what your memory will be of. What will people remember about you?
Good. So legacy, right? How you're going to be remembered, and feeling like you, after that, the things you care about will live on after you, or just that you'll be remembered by family, friends, loved ones, community. Time for one more? Yeah.
I have a very Orthodox son, so I have to make sure that I have an Orthodox with all of the pieces, parts that'll all fall into place.
Good.
So that they're comfortable.
Got it. So this is something, right? Family conflict, right? There can be a lot of
solve that one by just letting people.
Well, you see, right? So there's a lot, they're often family rife with family conflict in terms of what do they need, either from like a Jewish standpoint, halakha, Jewish law, in terms of burial rites and rituals, but then also the desire to, what would they have wanted? Which is why it's so important, if you haven't already, and it's something that is never too young to start, an advance directive, just to try to prevent family conflict where, children are squabbling over what they would have wanted. If you're able to leave behind, this is exactly what I would have wanted. Here are my directives, medically speaking, about when to intervene medically or when not to, how aggressively, how not. All that kind of stuff can prevent sticky situations, to say the least, where about, life support and it gets very, very, but Jewish law has a big role in that as well. What does Judaism say about end of life? And that's the Midrash Jewish standpoint for end of life. You may be aware, if I were just to do like a on one foot, you might say, choose life, right? Judaism at all costs, to any extent you can, preserve life. And I think, speaking about Orthodox, I think that is the predominant opinion in most stricter Orthodox communities, that you by no means withdraw life's. I want to challenge that notion with our Midrashim today a little bit, that maybe prioritizing other things that matter to people at end of life, like the things we talked about, to the extent possible, a smooth, painless, as little pain as possible, being surrounded by family, legacy, right? That there's room for prioritizing those things in a Jewish death as well. So let's dive in first. Midrash. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, from the Bavli, from Ketubot. Does anybody want to volunteer to read? Please go for it, David, and then Jackie.
Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi died. Sages decreed a fast and begged for mercy. And they said, and it says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi has died, would be stabbed with a sword. The maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi ascended to the roof and said, the upper realms are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the lower realms are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. May it be the will of God that the lower worlds should impose their world upon the upper world.
Good, pause. So what's happening is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, now he compiled the Mishnah, 200 CE. He is like the prince. He is the head of the yeshiva. He is the big rabbi, and he's dying, and his students are battling for his soul, right? Do not say that he is dead. If anybody says that he's dead, kill them, right? That is actually the extent of their denial to some extent, or refusal to accept the coming of death, right? And his maidservant goes up to the roof in this dramatic moment and is saying, the upper realms, meaning God and the angels, want, it's his time, they want him. But the lower worlds, meaning earth, we also want him, right? The students are saying, we're not letting you go. They're praying, they're fasting, they're trying to intervene as best they can so he does not die. So there's a battle between the upper world and earth, fighting over the soul of this special rabbi. And the maidservant says, may we win. May the lower world prevail over the upper world, which is pretty radical, right? Saying, good, we can hear on Zoom. I'm just looking at the chat. So let us win. Let him remain alive. Okay, keep reading, David.
When she saw how many times he would enter the bathroom and remove his
Fill-in,
phone,
phylacteries.
and then exit and put them back on with his intentional disease, he said, may it be the will of God that the upper worlds should impose their will upon the lower world.
Okay, so you have this initial very Jewish reaction, which is like, choose life at all costs. But then they're seeing only the maidservant, him at home, can see how much pain he's in, right? He's trying to say Shachrit, he's wearing morning service, he's got his tefillin on. You can't wear your tefillin into the bathroom. It's pretty graphic. He's got an intestine to go to the bathroom in the middle of prayer, which means he's got to take off his tefillin, go to the bathroom, then he comes back, puts his tefillin back on, but then he has to go to the bathroom again. He's miserable. And seeing that, the maidservant reverses her stance and says, oh, may the upper world prevail over the lower world. Maybe the rabbi is trying to sustain his life at all costs with their prayer and their fasting is not the desirable outcome. Okay, keep reading.
And the sages, meanwhile, would not be silent from begging for mercy. So she took a jug and threw it the roof to the ground. Due to the sudden noise, the sages were momentarily silent, moving from begging for mercy, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi died.
So how are you going to interrupt praying outside of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's house? There's actually another Midrash, which is David, when it came time for King David to die. By the way, they say that God took some of Adam's years and gave it to King David. So David's life was extended a little longer, getting some years from Adam, or maybe Adam was punished from, anyway. So David got some of Adam's years, but David couldn't die because he was studying Torah so much and God didn't want to interrupt David's Torah study to take his life. Or you can't interrupt somebody in Torah study. A little apple falls from the tree outside of King David's courtyard, and he hears the falling of the apple, and at that moment, God takes David. And the little apple link to Adam is also interesting in that story. It was probably a fig, but still. Figs don't make as much noise when they fall, so it needs to be an apple. Okay, so she drops a jug from the top of the roof. It shatters. They're interrupted from their prayer, and in that moment, God takes Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So what are your reactions to this? How does it resonate with you in terms of extending versus letting there be room for considering pain and suffering and prioritizing comfort or the ending of life? Yes.
In one way that in modern day people look upon this is not living prolonging life, but prolonging dying. And at least in Western culture, the idea of prolonging dying is not considered a virtue. It's considered a bad thing.
Right.
So this points out the tension between is he living or is he dying?
Good. So great distinction, right? We think that we are prolonging life when we intervene medically very intensely. Right. Good. I want to get to mercy in a second, Jackie. Just want to finish this, but that's a great point. So real quick, wait, sorry, I just want to finish Jerry's point that that we've gotten so good at extending life, but really is what we're doing extending death, drawing death on and making life. Good. Good. Thank you for sharing. I know, again, this is the vulnerability we're talking about being in a sukkah and the temporality of it. So I appreciate everybody sharing vulnerability. I know it's very hard, so I want to be mindful of that. But Jackie is saying that the maidservant here had mercy, right? You might say, if you're taking the stricter stance, oh my God, she pulled the plug on Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? She's interrupted the life-sustaining prayer that the students were offering. She killed Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. You could look at it that way, but Jackie is looking at it as an act of mercy, having compassion by not drawing out death any longer. He was the only one who could see the pain that he was in. Right, so Jackie's bringing up the selfishness point, that the concept of selfishness. Are the students trying to keep him alive for him or for them? Because he's this great light and they love him. If he's gone, all that Torah is learning is gone as well. Obviously, when it comes to legacy, certainly his legacy remains, everything he's given us, not to mention what, the biggest being the Mishnah, right? This is the book that precedes the Talmud. So big legacy, but they don't want to let him go. But the question is that selfish at the end of the day?
Nelson.
Nelson, yeah.
My wife Betsy says there's nothing noble about pain.
Nelson says, my wife,
My
there's
wife
nothing
Betsy.
noble about pain. Betsy.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? Because there is this idea of like toughing it out and the heroic path being going through all of the aggressive interventions to stay alive. But the counter to that is what Betsy's saying, which is that actually there is nothing noble in pain. It doesn't need to be this heroic thing you and of course I'm not speaking in as definitively, right? There are certainly circumstances where I think that is a very heroic thing to go through all of that to sustain your life. So I think there's certainly circumstances where you want to do that, but the pain itself doesn't need to be seen as this noble thing. Good. So Helena is supporting Betsy what you were saying by saying that it's actually more Christian to think of suffering as noble, as something that is divine, right? Jesus suffered, and so your suffering is divine. Good. Right. No, I'm saying no. Sorry, I made that clear, but I'll make it clear. Helena is saying that's not her perspective, that's the Christian perspective. That's suffering, right? We all have our cross to bear. Okay, let's move on to the next Midrash. Who would like to read? Jackie, did you want to read? Yeah, they brought Rabbi Hanina. Let me scroll down on the.
Our teacher, what do you see? Flying to the heavens. They said to him, "You should open your mouth, and the fire will enter you, and you will die quickly." Rabbi Hanin ben Paragon said to him, "It's preferable that the one who gave me my soul should take it away, and one should not harm himself in the case of death." The executioner said to him, "My teacher, if I may kiss the flame and take off the cups and wool from your heart, so that you will die sooner than you suffer less, will you bring me to the life of the world to come?" Rabbi Hanina ben Paragon said to the executioner, "Yes." The executioner said, "Take an oath from me that what you say is true." Rabbi Hanina ben Paragon took the oath of him, and the executioner immediately increased the flame and took off the tufts of wool from his heart, causing his soul to leave the body quickly. The executioner too then fell into the fire and died.
Okay, so a lot going on here, and I just want to recap it. So Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion was a martyr, like Rabbi Hillel. He was sentenced for execution because, Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Akiva. He was sentenced to death by the Romans for teaching Torah out publicly, right? So his penalty for teaching Torah was to be wrapped in a Torah scroll and set on fire. And the way they did this, they were very creative about how to make a painful end. They took tufts of wool and dipped it in water and put it over his heart to retard the flames, to extend so that he wouldn't die so quickly, right? They wanted him to die in pain, so they put the wet tufts of wool on him. And so his students said, this time they're like the maidservant in the previous Midrash, saying, "Let's hasten the suffering. Open your mouth so the flames will enter you. You'll die more quickly." But Rabbi Teradion says, "I can't do that. I can't do that because, and this is where we get that strict Orthodox perspective, which I'm saying Orthodox, but it's really just more traditional. It's also well in the conservative movement, right? It's not, and Reform. It's a Jewish stricture, Qumrah, right? That you cannot do anything that hastens your own death, right? He says it's better that God who gave me my soul should take it. If this is the end, that is my fate, let me grin and bear it, right? Let me bear it like a noble martyr. I can't hasten my own death. I can't, if it happens, it happens. I can't speed it on. But then there's a differentiation, right? There's a difference between hastening your own death and removing obstacles to your natural death. So that the tufts of wool and the amount of flame, those are just obstacles to the death that's coming. So when the executioner, who in this story, and again, the rabbis sometimes imagine that certain characters are more sympathetic to Judaism than they were at the time, right? So in this case, they're imagining that even the executioner would have had great respect for this great rabbi, to the point where he's going to have a moment of changing his perspective and say, Rabbi, even the executioner calls him Rabbi, my teacher, can I remove the tufts and increase the flame so that you die faster? And to that, he says yes. So this is introducing a very subtle distinction, that while you can't open your mouth to hasten death, you can remove obstacles that have been placed in the way of the death that's already happening. Does that make sense? Yes.
No, isn't hastening your death equivalent to committing suicide?
So suicide is a little bit different, though it could be an umbrella in that category. But I want to be very sensitive about that, because in more traditional Judaism, it used to be that those who died by their own hand could not be buried in a Jewish cemetery. It was shunned, but with more modern understanding of the disease of the mental health issue of depression, and which leads to suicide, we have, and I say we as in Judaism, and certainly more progressive liberal streams of Judaism, are now much more enlightened about how this is not often a choice somebody makes to end their life, which is the avera, the sin, the transgression. It is more so a disease that is leading someone to feel that life is filled with so much suffering and pain that death is the welcome release, or what's needed. So that actually is the result of a disease and not a free choice somebody is making to throw their life away. Exactly. Correct. So the distinction here is that the death by burning was his fate, so to speak, right? This is how he's going to meet his end. So he can't change anything about that. But the tufts of wool and the things that are making it extra painful, that are sustaining his life unnecessarily, those are like human added interventions to prolong life, in this case, for the sake of suffering and torture. But that could be removed because that's not part of this fate, so to speak. The tufts of wool are not the fate. So that can be removed. Yes.
Modern technology has made it very difficult, because a person dies, they're resuscitated, they're put on the respirator, and my experience during Orthodox people will not allow the respirator to be discontinued.
Right.
But it's an obstacle.
Exactly. So here, this is the tough question, right? So when you're talking about respirators or intubation and machines that are keeping somebody alive in Jewish tradition, even in this more open-minded framework that I'm hoping to present us with today, not from my opinion, but from our own source texts, Jewishly, halakhically speaking, it is much more problematic to withdraw care once it's already been administered than it would be to withhold those interventions. So you could say, look, we can hook them up to the respirator. We could get X amount of time. That's the prognosis, but it'll be a painful remainder of time, and they won't be there. Their body will be working, their heart is pumping, but their brain, not so much. They may even be brain dead. So those are the questions you have to address. But it would be a fallacy to say, as a Jew, it's my obligation to intervene as aggressively as possible, hook them up, do everything you can because I choose life. And many people believe that. But what I think, if you go back to the sources, you see that actually, no, those are the tufts of wool, you might determine, that are sustaining, prolonging this torture. And you're not actually obligated, Jewishly, to intervene aggressively just because you can. You can say, I want to withhold that care for the sake of comfort and compassion. That is a very valid Jewish response. But once you've already hooked up the life-sustaining machines, halachically, it is much, much more problematic to remove them, because that would be actively hastening death. Because now you have been sustaining life, and you're removing that life-sustaining care that they've already been. That's not to say that you can't do it, but it's much trickier halakhically. Right, and then the question of what is death? Is it brain death or is it heart death? And there, I could bring you more midrashim if we were really going to go a deep dive, because there's a midrash about if somebody like rubble falls on somebody and they're trapped under rubble, and it's Shabbat, so it would be breaking Shabbat, but pikuach nefesh, to save a life, you do it. However, you don't do anything unnecessarily in the name of pikuach nefesh. So the question is, do you dig enough only so that you could hear a heartbeat or breath if they're breathing? And so there's a debate about what is death. Is it the cessation of breath or the heartbeat, or is it brain function? And that is a whole longer debate. I actually have a chapter I've written on it. If you're interested, I could send you the chapter, but it's a Jewish approaches to end of life, and it dives into bioethics and the definition of death. So I can share that with anybody interested in further reading. That was not what I worked on for All Meets World. No, we didn't touch on it. Ron, you had a thing earlier. You have a comment?
I was, well, when Bill said about the suicide, I was thinking the same thing. You can't commit suicide, but it's all right to be assisted in.
So that's another. That's
yeah. What this sounds like to me.
Right. So the question of aid in dying, right? And again, so it's something that just for me, I have stopped saying committed suicide recently, because it was brought to my attention that it makes it sound like you're focusing on the breach of law, right? You've committed a breach of law. You've committed. So now I try to say more like died by their own hand or took own life, things like that, because then it doesn't put that stigma, which is a real issue. But I'm not saying you shouldn't say it. I'm just bringing that to our attention. But so that's the question of aid in dying, right? What is the Jewish take on aid in dying? And we've actually touched on that. That is the discussion we're having now, which is the difference between withholding life-sustaining interventions and actively withdrawing care that's already been administered. So in Jewish law, it's much more acceptable to withhold care. You don't have to intervene aggressively if you decide, or if obviously, first and foremost, if the patient decides that's not what they want. But it's much harder the aid in dying is much more about, can you give somebody a pill that ends their life, or can you unplug? And those are things that, it's passive euthanasia versus active euthanasia. And the misconception is that both are not allowed in Jewish thought. But what I want to open us up to is the real possibility that passive euthanasia is actually much more acceptable, even very traditionally in our sources. Active euthanasia is still a real question. There's a Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who's a big light in the conservative movement, has written a lot of tshuvot. He originally wrote a tshuva against active euthanasia, that it is certainly not okay within Jewish law. He very recently, I forget how old he turned. I think he just celebrated a milestone birthday, but later in his life, he has actually revisited that topic and published, he changed his mind. He has a new tshuva now that actually charts a halachic path towards active euthanasia being an acceptable option in the case where somebody is in chronic pain and basically screaming their way to the end. That God, who is full of compassion, would 80. Okay, just turned 80. That a God who is full of compassion would actually would actually accept a path towards active euthanasia in those rare circumstances, though not uncommon. Yes. Yes. I know, I was waiting for your, yeah. No. This is my point. This is my point with this. So you're not. Right. Right. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. No. This is you are in good company, right? And even here we have a subtle and important distinction that you, as Jews, we do choose life, and we do want to prolong life, but the caveat is perhaps not at all costs, right? Not if that means perpetual suffering and pain, and that a natural death, which we're fighting off at all means, is actually the compassionate end of suffering. But that's not to say that we still don't do everything we can, because what if we can actually cure this and they're able to live a life that is meaningful and comfortable for them? Then of course, as Jews, to life, l'chaim, and choose. I mean, it is so core to who we are. So no, I know you said that tongue in cheek, but you're the opposite of a sinner. You I would say a saint, but I know that's going back to the Christianity point you brought up before. No one is a saint. No, but you're a hero, and as a medical, as a doctor, and our medical workers are heroes, and the nurses, but I want to make this conversation not just about, life is disease is a problem to be solved at the expense of the human behind the disease, and what matters to us most when thinking about the end of life, and letting that be Jewishly a significant priority, not just sustaining life, but what matters most at the end of life. Yes. Right.
I had power. So I got into a big argument with my sister, who's the mother.
Yes.
And she finally said, okay, well, let him live through Shabbos. And at the end of Shabbos, he can recompletion.
Wow.
And it was my decision.
Yeah.
Because I had power of attorney. I said, my father would not have wanted to live this way. In fact,
Right.
They wanted to send him to a nursing home and be fed with food.
Yeah.
And I said, no way.
Right. And my hope is that after reading these midrashim, you feel more confused, more confused in one
way.
or supported. Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is why, again, so there's a rabbi from home, great rabbi, another big light in the conservative movement, Rabbi Eddie Feinstein, and he gave I believe it was a Yom Kippur sermon once, where he talked about these themes. He talked about end of life and prioritizing not just the extension of life, though again, that is incredibly crucial in Jewish thought and practice, but also how we die and what matters most, and comfort, and he ended by telling his children who were in attendance how he wanted to die, and giving basically the advanced directive to his kids in real time. And he was trying to encourage the community to do that, to start thinking, to have your advanced directive to prevent. It's so common where children have to fight over what would mom have wanted, what would dad have wanted. Well, there's pain, well, there's tradition, well, there's their personal beliefs, well, there's the reality on the ground. And if you could have it written out, and you could always change it, and you should always revisit and update, but it may make that a lot easier than it has to. Yeah.
There's another factor which is very relevant to here. We're differentiating between starting therapy and then continuing therapy. But the decision to start therapy is not made by the family. It's made by the doctor's team.
Right.
And their training is all to sustain life.
Correct.
So you're not going to be asked what you want until your family member is intubated on a respirator, then they're gonna ask you,
Right,
what do you want?
right,
No,
So-
Well, they have your directive as a DNR.
right.
That is correct, but the team who does the code does not have the DNR.
So I want to transition here, because this is a
Actually,
perfect
to
segue.
Go along with that.
Okay, go ahead.
My brother had all kinds of issues. I called 911 one time, get an ambulance. And I had the DNR in my hand when the ambulance came and still insisted on trying to give her CPR and everything else.
Interesting.
They would not accept it.
Interesting. So there may, right, there's the theoretical and then there's the practical, and the question of at what point will the medical team, honor a DNR or advanced directives, but at what point are they obligated to continue to sustain life up until a certain point? So no, it's a serious question.
There's that when they got to the hospital accepted. Stop.
Got it. Maybe the ambulance versus hospital too is another thing. But so what I want, okay, yeah, height of battle. Yeah. Right.
Right. She said, are you trying to?
It's an agent, right.
She said
Wow.
that his brother, he was in charge of a lot of the world stuff.
Right.
Kaiser was into. it.
Yeah.
All over the world. But I had
Yeah. Wow.
she was still.
Yeah.
in charge.
There's a rabbinic saying, "Lev yodea marat nafsho," that a soul knows its own bitterness. That we nobody knows your own suffering like yourself. That, right. 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 Go ahead. Yes.
We had a dilemma, but on a different level. My mother had had a surgery and she said they have one chance to get this right. He said, I do not want to be packed up into little pieces to treat cancer. And later, she got cured of the cancer. She lost circulation in her leg. And the choice we had was remove the part of the leg, which would be cutting her pieces against her wishes, or letting her die from gangrene. And we had a hard time with that. My brother had a harder time than I did. He went to Rabbi Schachter and said, Rabbi Schachter, what do we follow here? My mother's wishes or the medical source? And the answer from Rabbi Schachter was preserve life.
Right.
So you do the procedure.
Right. So it is by no means cut and dry, black or white. Right. And we know that. And we know that. But I'm wanting to complicate the conversation by going back to the source.
Brother to cover enough to yell at you, but
Didn't happen.
oh,
Yeah.
so
Right.
what you're saying is it didn't matter then in this case.
What it did is it made for a more peaceful death. Because to die by gangrene is not.
Right. 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 And look at, wait, I had something, but I lost it. But thank you for sharing that. 'Cause again, this is painful stuff.
It was,
Yeah. Oh, what I wanted to say is my mom is in palliative medicine, and our last source here, which I won't get to yet, I want to hear, but the last source is from a doctor who Atul Gawande, he wrote a book, Being Mortal. And his whole point is that we put such emphasis, especially speaking as a doctor, is on fighting the disease, that we often lose sight of what does the patient actually want? What is important to them at end of life? So his big thesis is that he encourages all doctors to have that conversation with the patient. And that doesn't, mean, prioritize one thing or another. It just means have the conversation so that any doctor treating the patient knows what matters most. So that the surgery without conflict with this need of yours, or if you want to stay alive so long as you're able to watch football and eat ice cream, then we can cater a medical allow you to still be, but the palliative medicine herself, and this is to your point, too, that because this is just going to prolong suffering. But then there's always that story of, but then they did it, and miraculously it actually cured this really like certain prognosis that it was going to be death, and it actually she survived and got 5 more years of that they never thought was good. So again, it's not easy, and I'm certainly not just saying only do what will lead to comfort, even if that means not trying to prolong life. But I am also definitely saying that as Jews, we do not need to prolong life at all costs, especially if it just prolongs a patient's suffering and pain. Oh yeah, no, everything is right. Everything is a debate, but that's what the beauty of this is.
His view and
Yeah.
my wife's is totally confused.
Oh, good. Yeah, Rabbi Dorf is a great resource. But I have to say, so I interned at Cedar Sinai in LA hospital and doing chaplaincy, my CPE, clinical pastoral education. And the head of Cedar Sinai is an Orthodox rabbi, Jason Weiner, and he wrote a Halacha L'Maseh, a book of Halacha on end of life practices. So I also recommend that book. And he's Orthodox, and he spends a lot of his time on the phone with Orthodox rabbis who are saying, by no means will you withdraw care or withhold care. And there are many times where he has that conversation with them, pushing back on that, Orthodox to Orthodox, that there actually is a pathway here halachically. But again, that's not to say that's always the right course, just that it is a valid course. I want to end with this one more text, and then you can continue our discussion. Does somebody want to read? This is from Atul Gawande from his book, Being Mortal. And if somebody on Zoom wants to read, you're more than welcome as well.
You have to roll it up.
Yes, I have to roll it up. And I hope you got the first text. I don't know if I scrolled to that first text, but here it is, just that first one about the maidservant and the pot. But now we're on page 3 at page 2 at the bottom. Okay, let's have someone in the room. Any takers? Yeah, great. Oh, you don't have a paper? Oh my gosh. Awesome.
Clear, and we understand this, but the most crucial failure in how we keep accepting the end. It's a failure to recognize their priorities beyond really being safe and living longer. The chance to shape one's story is essential to sustaining and breathing life. We have opportunity to retract from our institutions, our culture, and the conversation in ways that transform the possibilities for the last of everyone's lives.
Thank you. Yes, one of the things he talks about is that in modern Western medicine, most people die in a hospital. Fluorescent lights, and maybe with family, maybe not with family, but historically, it didn't used to be that way. Right? Historically, most people died at home, surrounded by family and the comfort of their own homes. And so he does question a little bit some of what's taken for granted in the miracle of Western medicine, right? It's unbelievable what we're able to accomplish with Western medicine. But the question of does death have to look a certain way for everyone? Does it need to be in the hospital, aggressive intervention until you die in pain, or are there, the question of how do we incorporate, what does each individual, what matters most to them, and how do we incorporate that into their care plan? And does death have to look a certain way, sterile or not?
Hospice.
Yeah,
Give you drugs, to keep it clean.
right. Right.
People die. So as everything, there are more than one way.
Of course. But are you saying died alone in the hospital or at home? In the hospital, right? Right, exactly. Right. No, it's terrible. So when I was doing the internship, it was 2020. So it was peak COVID, and not myself, but a colleague who's actually he was a Catholic priest in a student. He was in training, and he put a FaceTime call in because you couldn't go into the room at this point. So it's horrific, right? Dying alone. But he put the FaceTime in so that the family could be there, and gave them an iPad so they could have their family in virtually. But it's horrifying.
Came to the States in and the only amount of time they allowed him to say goodbye was 10 minutes. So it would have been at that point, it would have been better that it always the family.
Right.
So there are
Correct.
Saying goodbye, is that for the people that are gonna live or for the person who's dying? I think it's for the people that are gonna live.
Because they need that closure.
They need the closure. The person who's dying is gonna be dead.
no, but you like to be surrounded.
I'm sitting here thinking about it. I think, to tell you the truth, when I'm sick, I want to be alone. I don't want people bothering me.
No, not when it's.
Hey, I'm different. I that's my own problem.
Yeah, but that's the point, is that everybody has their own what's important to me at the end of life. And if you don't have that conversation, if it's not part of the medical plan, then you might be subjecting somebody to a death that they didn't want. And we don't have to. We don't, it's not.
Same.
Hmm.
So. Same.
Was that because of COVID or was it? Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. No, it's so heartbreaking.
Raging. So busy in Jersey, cemeteries. Every 10 minutes over the rain, and they took the shovels with them. Son was there. Because the rest of the family was afraid of COVID.
Yeah.
So Stuart was taking the scissors on his knees.
Uh, Unbelievable.
Fortunately, it's better.
Yeah, now we're saying, yeah, thank God. But just so terrible. Yeah. So go ahead.
It did bring the idea of how to die to the front. Because I think before that, people hadn't thought about it, but when they saw the cruelty of dying alone, made everybody aware of the fact that we about these things.
Yeah,
Cemetery goes, we have a view on whether you should be in a Jewish cemetery or it doesn't matter. There's such a thing like, I know this thing in Jewish cemetery, but the conservative movement have a Does it say anything about it?
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely a preference for being buried in a Jewish cemetery. I mean, there are certain, burial rituals. I mean, if you do like Tahara and all the leading up to that, being in the hands of a Jewish.
No, just in general, like if you're just buried next to, should you be buried next to a Jewish person or?
I'm not aware of like a law against it that it's like not kosher to be buried in a non-Jewish cemetery. I think if if there's a circumstance in which that is what is most meaningful, it couldn't go, obviously cremation, and when you get into that stuff, Judaism is much clearer that it is not in favor of those ways, because it should return to the earth, and also when it gets into questions of resurrection, if you believe in that form of a physical resurrection of the Messiah, and when the Messiah comes, and the Sfiatum 18, right, that the revival of the dead, there's this mystical notion that you want to have your physical body and not have been cremated. So there are a lot of different. That's at the end of the 9th chapter. Read that as well. But I think culturally, communally, I mean, we stick together as Jews. It's something that it also may have evolved from like not being able to be buried in other cemeteries before.
We don't have that in our family, but a lot of husband and wife same.
Correct.
What happens there?
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think that you must, as a Jew, be buried in a Jewish cemetery. I think a lot of people just prefer it for communal reasons, for ritual reasons, for all that.
We're Jewish section of a regular school.
Yeah, right. No, that's totally fine.
In the small cities, they don't always have a Jewish.
No, correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's more important to like that the rituals around death, if you're able to observe those that they are performed. I don't think so much where you're actually buried, as long as you are buried and under certain things happen before that. And anyway, so I know that this was a really tough topic again, and I just want to I want to say thank you for having this conversation on what is a joyous festival holiday, but one that also reminds us of our vulnerability and our temporality, that we are, we're going to do Yizkor at the end of Shmini Atzeret, right? So death is also a part of this holiday, and I wanted us to explore that in our Midrashim, stories to live by, what also includes stories to die by, and how this informs how we want to die, but also how we want to live and continue to imbue life with meaning and the things that are most important to us. Dignity. Good.
Talking about dignity, composting, you talked about that at all?
No, thank you. So go ahead. Do you want to do it or do you want me to do it?
Fine. Fine.
Rust Belt Riders.
So we can now compost. We didn't do any of our silverware, glasses, plates yet. So we can do anything food. So if you have leftover bagel or white napkins. Although it's compost buckets.
Good.
Of course, orange peel.
Yeah.
Did I even say that to you, Bill?
This is part of our sustainability initiatives. You never believe, you would think, why, I could just throw away banana peels and orange peels. Why? It's just going to decompose. Unfortunately, they go into landfills that are so saturated with plastics and garbage, they actually don't get the exposure to the air that they need to decompose. And they create methane gas, which is, a greenhouse gas. So composting is actually a really big mitzvah that we're investing in. And so you could just put food scraps into that little Trader Joe's bag that's in the butt. Phenomenal. Thank you, everybody. I always really appreciate learning together, and Chag Sameach, Modim L'Simcha, and L'chaim, to life. This conversation.